The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the dusty wooden platform, and Grace Lawson pressed her gloved hand against the window, watching as Sweetwater, Wyoming materialized before her like a promise she hoped wouldn't break. It was the spring of 1876, and everything Grace owned fit into 2 worn carpet bags and a small trunk strapped to the top of the coach. She stepped down onto the wooden planks, her boots sending up small clouds of dust that swirled in the afternoon sunlight. The town stretched before her in shades of brown and gray, buildings that looked like they'd been assembled hastily and might blow away with the next strong wind. But it was hers now, or at least it would be. This was as far from Philadelphia as she could get, and that was exactly what she needed. "Miss, you want your trunk brought down," the driver called from above, already working at the ropes. "Please," Grace said, squinting up at him. "Is there a boarding house nearby? Mrs. Henderson's place, 2 streets over. Can't miss it, only building painted yellow." He hefted her trunk down with a grunt. "You got someone meeting you." Grace shook her head, gathering her bags. The truth was, she knew absolutely no one in Sweetwater. She'd come because her aunt's lawyer had written to say there was a small inheritance waiting, enough to make a fresh start if she was careful. After everything that had happened back east, the deaths of her parents to consumption, her broken engagement to a man she'd discovered was already married, she needed that fresh start more than she needed her next breath. The boarding house was exactly where the driver said it would be, a cheerful splash of yellow paint in an otherwise colorless street. Grace knocked, and within moments a plump woman with graying hair and kind eyes opened the door. "Well, you must be the young lady from the telegram, Mrs. Henderson said, ushering her inside. "Grace Lawson, isn't it? Come in, come in. You look half dead from that journey." The room was simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that overlooked the main street. Grace set down her bags and felt something inside her chest loosen just slightly. This was hers. Nobody here knew about her failed engagement or the whispers that had followed her through Philadelphia society. Nobody knew that Thomas had courted her while his wife waited at home in Boston. Nobody knew anything, and that anonymity felt like the first deep breath after being underwater too long. "Supper's at 6, Mrs. Henderson said from the doorway. "There's fresh water in the pitcher. You rest yourself, dear." Grace didn't rest. Instead, she unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 good dresses in the small wardrobe and arranging her brushes and mirror on the washstand. Then she sat at the window and watched the town move below her. Cowboys rode past, their hats low against the sun. A wagon loaded with supplies creaked down the street. Women in practical dresses hurried along the wooden sidewalks, their faces weather-worn but determined. She was one of them now, a woman in the West, starting over. The next morning, Grace made her way to the lawyer's office. Mr. Patterson was a thin man with spectacles that kept sliding down his nose, and he shuffled through papers with the air of someone who'd rather be doing anything else. "Ah, yes, Miss Lawson. Your Aunt Clara's estate." He pushed a document across the desk. "She left you a small property on the edge of town. It's not much, just a cottage and a bit of land, but it's paid for. And there's a sum of $300. $300. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough." Grace signed where he indicated, her hand steady despite the flutter in her chest. "The property's been vacant for 6 months, Mr. Patterson continued. Might need some work. Your aunt was ill for a long time before she passed." Grace walked to the cottage that afternoon, her skirts stirring up dust with each step. It sat at the end of a dirt road, a small wooden structure with a sagging porch and windows that desperately needed washing. The yard was overgrown with weeds, and one of the shutters hung at an angle. But it was solid, and it was hers, and when she stepped inside and saw the iron stove and the simple furniture covered in dust sheets, she felt something she hadn't felt in months: hope. She spent the next week cleaning. She scrubbed floors until her hands were raw, washed windows until they gleamed, and beat the dust from every surface. Mrs. Henderson helped her hire a man to fix the shutter and patch a hole in the roof. Grace used some of her money to buy supplies at the general store: fabric for curtains, oil for the lamps, food for her pantry. It was at the general store on her fourth visit that she first saw Xander Cole. He was standing at the counter, discussing an order with the shopkeeper, and Grace noticed him the way anyone would notice a striking figure. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair that needed cutting and shoulders that strained against his work shirt. But it was his voice that caught her attention, low and measured, with a courtesy that seemed at odds with the rough setting. "I'll need that delivered by Thursday," he was saying. "The ranch hands are going through supplies faster than I anticipated." "Will do, Mr. Cole," the shopkeeper said. "How's your father doing?" A shadow crossed the man's face. "Same as always. Good days and bad days." Grace pretended to examine a bolt of calico, but she was listening. The shopkeeper noticed her and smiled. "Be right with you, miss. You're the Lawson girl, aren't you? Took over Clara's place." "Yes," Grace said, stepping forward. "I need some seeds, if you have them, for a vegetable garden." The tall man, Xander Cole, glanced at her then, and Grace found herself meeting eyes that were an unusual shade of gray, like storm clouds. He nodded politely and stepped aside. "Madam," he said simply, and then he was gathering his purchases and heading for the door. "That's Xander Cole," the shopkeeper said once he was gone. "Runs the C ranch with his father, though his father's been poorly lately. Good man, Xander, keeps to himself mostly." Grace bought her seeds and returned to her cottage, but she found herself thinking about those gray eyes and that polite nod. She scolded herself for the distraction. She hadn't come to Sweetwater to find a man. She'd come to escape one, to build a life on her own terms. The garden took shape slowly. Grace had never planted anything in her life, but she followed the instructions the shopkeeper's wife gave her, and soon neat rows of turned earth stretched across a sunny patch beside the cottage. She planted beans and carrots, tomatoes and squash, working until her back ached and her hands were covered in dirt. It was good work. Honest work. And every night when she fell into bed exhausted, she slept without dreaming of Thomas and his lies. 2 weeks after she'd arrived in Sweetwater, Grace was in town buying lamp oil when she heard shouting from the street. She stepped outside to see a horse rearing in its traces, eyes rolling white with fear. The wagon it was attached to was tilting dangerously, and a woman was screaming from the driver's seat. Grace didn't think. She ran forward, grabbing for the horse's bridle. The animal was massive and terrified, but she'd grown up around her uncle's carriage horses, and she knew to speak low and steady. "Easy now, easy," she murmured, holding tight even as the horse tried to pull away. "You're all right. Easy." Then someone else was there beside her, strong hands taking the bridle from her grip, a broad shoulder nudging her gently back. Xander Cole spoke to the horse in that same low voice she'd heard in the store, and within moments, the animal began to calm. "Good boy," Xander said, stroking the horse's neck. "That's it." The woman in the wagon was crying with relief. Several townspeople had gathered and someone helped her down. Grace stood back, her heart still pounding, and watched as Xander checked the horse thoroughly, running his hands down its legs, examining the harness. "Bee sting," he said finally, pointing to a swelling on the horse's shoulder. "That's what spooked him. He'll be fine, but you should walk him home slowly." The woman thanked him profusely, and gradually the crowd dispersed. Grace was about to slip away when Xander turned and looked directly at her. "That was brave," he said. "Also foolish. He could have trampled you." "I couldn't just stand there," Grace replied, lifting her chin. "That woman might have been killed. Something that might have been approval flickered in those gray eyes. You know horses? Some. My uncle kept a stable in Philadelphia. Philadelphia." He said it like he was tasting the word. "Long way from there to here." "That's the idea," Grace said before she could stop herself. Xander studied her for a moment, and Grace had the uncomfortable feeling he was seeing more than she wanted to reveal. Then he touched the brim of his hat. "Well, Miss Lawson, try to stay out of trouble. Sweetwater's quieter than Philadelphia, but it has its dangers. How do you know my name? Small town," he said with the faintest hint of a smile. "Everyone knows everything." Then he was walking away, his long strides carrying him toward a large roan horse tied outside the saloon. Grace watched him mount in one fluid motion and ride off, and she realized she was still slightly breathless. Not from the near accident with the horse, she told herself firmly. From the excitement of the moment. That was all. Spring turned toward summer, and Grace's garden began to sprout. Green shoots pushed through the dark soil, and she tended them carefully, watering each morning and evening. She made friends with Mrs. Henderson and with Sarah Mitchell, a young woman her own age who worked at the town's small dress shop. Sarah was engaged to a cowboy named Frank, and she had a refreshing directness that Grace appreciated. "You should come to the dance next Saturday," Sarah said one afternoon when Grace stopped by the shop to look at buttons. "The whole town turns out. It's the most fun we get around here." "I don't know," Grace hesitated. "I'm not really here for socializing." "Why are you here then?" Sarah asked, not unkindly. "You can't just work and sleep forever. That's no kind of life." Grace bought her buttons and promised to think about it, but she knew she wouldn't go. Dancing meant conversation, and conversation meant questions, and questions meant explaining about Thomas and the mess she'd left behind. It was easier to keep to herself. But on Saturday evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Grace found herself restless. Music drifted from the town hall, fiddle and piano playing something lively and warm. She stood at her window, listening, and suddenly her cottage felt very small and very lonely. Before she could talk herself out of it, she changed into her better dress, the blue one with the white collar, and pinned up her dark hair. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw a woman of 22 years who'd been hiding long enough. The town hall was crowded and bright with lantern light. People were dancing, laughing, talking in clusters. Grace stood in the doorway, suddenly uncertain when Sarah spotted her and hurried over. "You came? I'm so glad. Come on, let me introduce you to people." The evening passed in a blur of names and faces. Grace danced with Frank, who was clumsy but enthusiastic, and with old Mr. Patterson the lawyer, who was surprisingly spry. She was catching her breath at the refreshment table when she felt someone's presence beside her. "You look like you're actually enjoying yourself," Xander Cole said. Grace turned, startled. She'd seen him earlier, dancing with a few of the local women, but he'd been on the other side of the room. Up close, in the warm light, she noticed details she'd missed before. The small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar, the strength in his hands as he held a cup of lemonade. "I am," she said, and realized it was true. "I didn't expect to." "Why not? I'm not usually much for crowds." "Neither am I," Xander admitted. "But my father always says a man has obligations to his community. I think he hopes I'll find a wife at one of these things." The comment was casual, but it made Grace's stomach flutter in a way she didn't want to examine too closely. "And will you?" "Not likely. Most of the unmarried women in Sweetwater have known me since I was 6 years old and stealing apples from Mrs. Chen's tree. Hard to be romantic about a man when you remember him with a black eye and torn breeches. Grace laughed, surprising herself. How old are you, if you don't mind my asking? 26. Old enough to know better, young enough to still make mistakes. You? 22. Xander nodded, and for a moment they stood in companionable silence, watching the dancers. Then he set down his cup and turned to her. Would you like to dance, Miss Lawson? I promise I won't step on your feet more than twice. Grace hesitated. Dancing with Frank or Mr. Patterson had been safe, meaningless. Dancing with Xander felt different, though she couldn't have said why. But his eyes were patient, waiting for her answer without pressure, and she found herself nodding. All right. He led her onto the floor as the band started a waltz. His hand settled at her waist, warm through the fabric of her dress, and his other hand enclosed hers gently. He was right, he was a good dancer, moving her through the steps with easy confidence. You're better than twice, Grace said. You haven't stepped on me at all. The night's young, Xander replied, and she heard the smile in his voice. Tell me about your ranch, Grace said, wanting to fill the silence. The Triple C. Not much to tell. We raise cattle, sell them in the fall. It's good land, my grandfather homesteaded it back in the 40s. My father's run it since he was 18, and now that he's sick, it's falling to me. I'm sorry about your father. Thank you. Some days he doesn't know who I am. Other days he's sharp as ever. The doctor says it's only going to get worse. Xander's voice was matter of fact, but Grace heard the pain underneath. What about you? What brings a Philadelphia lady to Sweetwater? I inherited my aunt's cottage, and I'm not a lady, not anymore. What are you then? Grace met his eyes. Someone trying to figure that out. Understanding passed between them, unspoken but real. The music swelled around them, and for those few minutes Grace forgot about Thomas and Philadelphia and everything she'd run from. There was only the dance and the warmth of Xander's hand at her waist, and the feeling that maybe, just maybe, she'd come to the right place after all. When the music ended, Xander released her with clear reluctance. Thank you for the dance, Miss Lawson. Grace, she said impulsively. Please call me Grace. Grace. He said her name like he was testing how it felt. I'm Xander. I know. That small smile again, transforming his serious face. Small town. Everyone knows everything, Grace finished, and they both laughed. Someone called Xander's name, and he excused himself with a polite nod. Grace watched him go, feeling oddly bereft. Sarah appeared at her elbow, grinning. Well, now, that looked promising. It was just a dance, Grace protested. And I'm the Queen of England. Xander Cole doesn't dance with just anyone, you know. He's particular. Grace felt heat rise in her cheeks. We were making conversation, that's all. But later that night, lying in her narrow bed, she found herself replaying every word they'd exchanged, every moment of that dance. And when she finally fell asleep, she dreamed not of the past but of gray eyes and calloused hands and a voice that made her feel safe. The next morning was Sunday, and Grace walked to the small church at the edge of town. The service was simple, the reverend's sermon about forgiveness and new beginnings. Grace sat in the back pew, listening, and felt tears prick her eyes. She'd carried so much anger toward Thomas, so much shame at her own naivety. Maybe it was time to let it go. After the service, as people milled about outside, she saw Xander helping an older man down the church steps. The resemblance was clear. This had to be his father. The older Cole was bent and slow-moving, and Xander's patience with him was evident in every careful movement. "This is my son," the older man was telling anyone who'd listen, his voice carrying a note of confusion. "He takes good care of the ranch." "Yes, sir, I do," Xander said gently. "Are you ready to head home now?" "Home? Yes, I suppose. Where's your mother? She was supposed to meet me here." Something painful crossed Xander's face. "Ma's been gone 5 years, Pa," Remember." The older man looked bewildered, then distressed. Xander spoke to him in low, soothing tones and gradually guided him toward a wagon. Grace felt like she was intruding on a private moment, but she couldn't look away. The tenderness with which Xander treated his confused father touched something deep inside her. Their eyes met across the churchyard. Xander nodded to her, and Grace nodded back, a moment of acknowledgement passing between them. Then he was helping his father into the wagon and driving away. "Sad situation," Mrs. Henderson said beside Grace. "Thomas Cole used to be the sharpest rancher in 3 counties. Now some days he doesn't even remember his own name. Hard on Xander, running everything alone. Doesn't he have help? Oh, ranch hands sure, good ones too, but the weight of it all, that's on his shoulders. He's got no siblings. His mother passed during the influenza epidemic of '71. Just him and his father fading more every day." Grace thought about that as she walked home, about Xander carrying such heavy responsibilities without complaint. She thought about the kindness in his eyes when he'd asked her to dance, the way he'd made her feel seen without being intrusive. She reminded herself sternly that she hadn't come to Sweetwater for romance. But her heart wasn't listening. The summer heat settled over Wyoming like a blanket. Grace's garden flourished, and she spent her mornings tending it and her afternoons doing sewing work she'd arranged with Sarah's shop. It wasn't much money, but combined with careful management of her inheritance, she was getting by. She saw Xander occasionally in town, always with a polite tip of his hat and a brief exchange of pleasantries. Sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, but he never sought her out beyond those chance encounters. It was Sarah who told her why. "He's trying to be respectful," Sarah explained one hot afternoon in late June. They were sitting in the shade behind the dress shop, hemming curtains. "Xander knows you came here to start fresh, and he figures the last thing you need is some rancher complicating your life." "How do you know that?" "Frank told me. Apparently Xander mentioned you, and Frank, being Frank, asked straight out if Xander was interested. Xander said you seemed like a woman who needed space, and he wasn't going to be the kind of man who couldn't respect that." Grace's hand stilled on the fabric. "He said that?" "More or less. So if you want him to know you'd welcome his company, you're going to have to make the first move." "I don't know if I want that," Grace said, but even as she spoke, she knew it was a lie. She'd been thinking about Xander more than she cared to admit. Wondering about his day, hoping to glimpse him in town, replaying their conversations in her mind. It terrified her, this pull toward him. Thomas had seemed charming too at first. How could she trust her own judgment after being so spectacularly wrong? But Xander wasn't Thomas. Everything she'd observed about him suggested a man of integrity, of quiet strength and genuine kindness. The way he cared for his father, the respect people showed him in town, the gentle way he'd calmed that frightened horse. That evening, Grace made a decision. She baked a pie, using precious sugar and the first cherries from Mrs. Henderson's tree. The next morning, she put on her bonnet, wrapped the pie carefully, and borrowed Mrs. Henderson's small cart to drive out to the Triple C Ranch. Her courage nearly failed her several times during the 3-mile journey. What if Xander thought her forward? What if he wasn't interested after all? What if she was making a terrible mistake? But she kept going, following the directions Sarah had given her, until she saw the ranch buildings spread across a green valley. The house was larger than she'd expected, a solid 2-story structure with a wide porch. Barns and corrals stretched beyond it, and she could see cattle dotting the distant hills. She drove up to the house, and before she could climb down, Xander emerged from the barn. He froze when he saw her, surprise clear on his face, then walked over quickly. "Grace, is everything all right?" "Yes, I brought you something." She felt foolish suddenly, a grown woman showing up uninvited with a pie, to thank you for helping with the horse that day, and for the dance. Xander's expression softened. He reached up to help her down from the cart, his hands strong and sure at her waist. You didn't need to do that, but I'm glad you did. Come inside, please. It's too hot to stand out here. The house was neat but clearly lacking a woman's touch. Functional furniture, clean but sparse. Xander led her to the kitchen and took the pie with genuine appreciation. Cherry pie. My favorite. How did you know? Lucky guess, Grace said, though she'd actually asked Sarah's Frank, who'd asked one of the Triple C hands. Xander cut 2 slices and poured them cold water from the well. They sat at the scrubbed wooden table, and for a few moments there was only the sound of forks on plates. This is delicious, Xander said. Best pie I've had in years. My mother taught me, before she got sick. Is that what brought you west? You lost your family, Grace nodded. My parents died within a month of each other 2 years ago. Consumption. I went to live with my aunt, but she wasn't well either, and there was a man. She paused, surprised at her own honesty. A man who turned out to be married already. I thought I loved him. I thought he loved me. I was wrong on both counts. Xander set down his fork. I'm sorry. That must have been hard. It was humiliating more than anything. Everyone in Philadelphia knew or thought they knew. The poor naive girl taken in by a scoundrel. When my aunt's lawyer wrote about the inheritance, I saw a way out. And now you're here. And now I'm here, Grace agreed. Starting over. How's that going? She smiled. Better than I expected. I like Sweetwater. I like my cottage and my garden. I like the people I've met. Anyone in particular? The question was light, but Xander's eyes were intent. Grace felt her heart speed up. There might be someone. Might he be sitting across from you right now? He might. Xander reached across the table, not quite touching her hand but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his skin. I've been thinking about you since that dance. Probably since before that, if I'm honest. But I didn't want to push. You came here to heal, and I figured the last thing you needed was another man making demands. What if I told you I've been thinking about you too? His fingers moved the last inch to cover hers. Then I'd say maybe we could spend some time together, get to know each other properly. No pressure, no expectations. Just 2 people seeing if maybe there's something worth exploring. Grace turned her hand over, lacing her fingers through his. His palm was calloused from work, warm and strong, and holding it felt like the most natural thing in the world. I'd like that, she said softly. The smile that spread across Xander's face was like the sun coming out. Yeah. They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped across the table, grinning at each other like fools. Then Xander squeezed her fingers gently. Can I show you the ranch? They spent the afternoon walking the property, Xander pointing out different features with obvious pride. The new barn he'd built last year, the stream that never ran dry even in the hottest summers, the lined shack up in the hills where the hands stayed during roundup. His father appeared briefly, shuffling out to the porch, and Xander introduced Grace carefully. Pa, this is Grace Lawson. She's new to Sweetwater. The older man studied her with shrewd eyes that looked startlingly like his son's. Pretty girl, you going to marry her? Pa. Xander's ears went red. It's a fair question, Thomas Cole Sr. said. You're not getting any younger and neither is she. Can she cook? I made the cherry pie on the table, Grace said, fighting back laughter. Any good? Your son seemed to think so. Thomas nodded slowly. Well then. Don't let this one get away, Xander. She's got spirit. Then he wandered back inside, leaving them both laughing on the porch. I'm sorry about that, Xander said, but he was grinning. He's got no filter anymore. I like him, Grace said honestly. He reminds me of my father before he got sick. Direct and unapologetic. As the sun began to lower, Xander drove Grace back to town in his wagon, the borrowed cart tied behind. They talked the whole way about everything and nothing. Their childhoods, favorite books, hopes for the future. Grace told him about her dream of expanding her garden, maybe selling produce at the market. Xander talked about his plans to improve the ranch's breeding stock, to build a legacy that would outlast him. When they reached her cottage, Xander helped her down and stood there, clearly reluctant to leave. "Can I see you again?" he asked. "Maybe take you to dinner at the hotel on Saturday." "I'd like that very much." He smiled, that warm, wonderful smile that made her insides flutter. Then, with a gentleness that made her breath catch, he lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles. "Until Saturday, then." Grace floated into her cottage, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched. Mrs. Henderson was going to have questions about the borrowed cart being returned by Xander Cole, but Grace didn't care. For the first time since Thomas had shattered her trust, she felt truly happy. Saturday couldn't come fast enough. Grace tried to focus on her work, on her garden, on anything but the anticipation building in her chest. Sarah helped her choose what to wear, lending her a beautiful jade green dress that brought out Grace's eyes. "You look stunning," Sarah declared Saturday evening. Xander's not going to know what hit him. The hotel restaurant was the fanciest place in Sweetwater, which admittedly wasn't saying much, but the proprietor had made an effort. White tablecloths, real china, candles in glass holders. Xander was waiting outside, and when he saw Grace, his whole face lit up. "You look beautiful," he said, offering his arm. "You clean up pretty well yourself." He'd foregone his usual work clothes for a proper suit, his dark hair neatly combed. They must have made quite a picture, walking into the restaurant together, because several people smiled and a few whispered behind their hands. Let them talk, Grace thought. She was done hiding. Dinner was perfect. They talked and laughed, and Grace found herself telling Xander things she'd never told anyone, fears and dreams she'd kept locked away. He listened with his whole attention, asking thoughtful questions, sharing his own vulnerabilities in return. "Sometimes I worry I'm not enough," he admitted over dessert. "The ranch is huge, and Pa's condition means I have to be owner, foreman, and caretaker all at once. The hands are good, but the final decisions all fall to me. What if I make the wrong choice? What if I run the whole thing into the ground?" "You won't," Grace said with certainty. "Everyone I've talked to speaks so highly of you, the way you handle things, the way you treat people. You're doing better than you think." "How do you know?" "Because I'm learning to trust my instincts again. And they're telling me you're a good man, Xander Cole, maybe the best I've ever met." His hand found hers across the table. "I don't know about that, but I'm trying, especially now that I've got someone worth trying for." After dinner, they walked slowly through the warm evening. The town was quiet, most people already home for the night. They ended up at Grace's cottage, standing on her small porch under a sky full of stars. "I had a wonderful time tonight," Grace said. "So did I." Xander hesitated, then said, "Grace, I want to be honest with you about my intentions. I'm not looking for a passing fancy or a casual flirtation. I'm 26 years old and I know what I want. I want a partner, someone to build a life with. I'm not saying that's us, not yet, but I needed you to know where I stand." Grace's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I want that too. I'm scared after what happened before, but I want it." "We'll go slow," Xander promised. "As slow as you need. But Grace, I'm going to court you properly, with the intention of making you my wife if you'll have me. I wanted you to know that up front. I appreciate your honesty." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the soap he'd used, the warm scent of his skin. "May I kiss you?" Grace's breath caught. She looked up into those gray eyes so full of hope and tenderness and knew this was a moment she'd remember forever. Yes. Xander cupped her face in his hands, his touch reverent, and lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, sweet, asking nothing and offering everything. Grace's eyes fluttered closed, and she let herself feel it fully, the warmth spreading through her chest, the rightness of being in his arms. When they finally parted, Xander rested his forehead against hers. "I'm going to fall in love with you," he whispered. "If I haven't already." "I think I'm already there," Grace admitted. They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other and the promise of what could be. Then Xander kissed her forehead and stepped back reluctantly. "I should let you get some rest, but I'll see you tomorrow. Maybe you'd like to come to the ranch for Sunday dinner. I'd love that." Grace watched him walk away, his long stride carrying him down the dark street. Then she went inside and leaned against the closed door, a smile she couldn't contain spreading across her face. She'd come to Sweetwater to start over, to leave the past behind. But standing here now, her lips still tingling from Xander's kiss, she realized she'd found so much more than a fresh start. She'd found home. The summer unfolded in a series of perfect days. Grace and Xander fell into a pattern of spending time together whenever his ranch duties allowed. She'd pack a lunch and ride out to the Triple C. He'd steal away for evening walks through town. On Sundays, Grace helped prepare dinner for Xander and his father, learning to navigate Thomas Sr.'s good days and bad. On the good days, the elder Cole was sharp and witty, full of stories about the early days of ranching in Wyoming. He told Grace about meeting Xander's mother at a barn dance in 1848, about building the ranch house with his own hands, about surviving brutal winters and drought years, and everything the frontier had thrown at him. On the bad days, he didn't recognize Grace at all, sometimes mistaking her for Xander's long-dead mother. Xander handled these moments with infinite patience, gently redirecting his father without making him feel foolish. "You're so good with him," Grace said one evening as they sat on the ranch house porch. Thomas had gone to bed early, exhausted from a day of confusion. "He did the same for me when I was young and stupid," Xander said. "Least I can do is return the favor now that he needs it. Still, it can't be easy. Nothing worth doing is easy." He turned to look at her, his eyes serious in the fading light. "But it's easier now that you're here." Grace leaned into his shoulder and his arm came around her naturally. They sat like that as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and Grace felt a contentment she'd never known before. This quiet moment with this good man was worth every hard mile she'd traveled to get here. In late July, a traveling photographer came through Sweetwater, and Xander insisted they have their portrait taken. "I want to remember this," he said. "The summer I met the woman who changed everything." They posed in front of the photographer's backdrop, Grace seated and Xander standing beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. Grace wore her best dress and a small smile, while Xander looked serious and protective. When they received the finished photograph a week later, Grace stared at it in wonder. They looked like a couple, like partners, like people building a future together. "What do you think?" Xander asked, watching her face. "I think we look right together," Grace said softly. "We are right together." August brought intense heat and the constant work of preparing for fall roundup. Xander's time was increasingly consumed by ranch business, but he still found moments for Grace. A quick ride into town to bring her fresh eggs from his chickens. An evening stolen for a walk by the creek. Love notes delivered by one of his hands, making Sarah sigh with envy at Grace's good fortune. Grace's garden was producing abundantly now, and she began selling her excess vegetables at the Saturday market. The money was modest but satisfying, proof that she could support herself, that she was building something real. Mrs. Henderson convinced her to make preserves as well, and soon Grace was known for her excellent pickles and tomato relish. "You've become quite the businesswoman," Xander said one Saturday, finding her at her market stall. "I'm impressed." "I learned from watching you," Grace replied. "You run that ranch like clockwork. That's different. The ranch was handed to me, but you're making it better than it was. That's not just maintaining, that's building, same as I'm doing here." Xander bought 3 jars of her pickles, insisting on paying full price despite her protests. "I'm supporting local business," he said with a grin. "Besides, these are the best pickles in Wyoming. You haven't tried anyone else's. Don't need to." As summer waned toward fall, Grace realized she was happier than she'd ever been, even before the disasters that had driven her west. Her life in Philadelphia seemed like it had happened to someone else, some different woman who'd been smaller and more afraid. She wasn't that woman anymore. Sweetwater had changed her, and more than that, Xander had changed her. He'd shown her what real love looked like, patient and steady, and built on mutual respect. He'd never tried to change her or diminish her. Instead, he seemed to delight in her strength, encouraging her business ventures, praising her intelligence, treating her as an equal partner even though they weren't yet married. And they would be married, Grace knew. It was an unspoken understanding between them, as certain as the sunrise. The question was when. The answer came in September, on an evening that started like any other. Grace was at the ranch helping prepare supper when Thomas Sr. had what would prove to be his last moment of clarity. He looked around the kitchen, at Grace stirring a pot at the stove and Xander setting the table, and his eyes sharpened with recognition. "You two planning to make me wait forever for a wedding?" he asked, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. Xander and Grace exchanged glances. "We wanted to give it time, Pa," Xander said gently. "Make sure we were certain." "Certain?" Thomas snorted. "Boy, I was certain about your mother the moment I saw her. When you know, and looking at you too, you know." "He's right," Grace said quietly. "I know." Xander crossed to her, taking her hands. "So do I. I've known since that first dance, maybe before. Grace Lawson, I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you make me laugh. I love how you are with my father, how you've built a life here through sheer determination. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you that." Grace felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I love you too. You've given me back something I thought I'd lost forever. The ability to trust, to hope, to believe in good things. You've made me glad I came here, glad I took a chance on starting over." "Marry me," Xander said. "Not someday, not eventually. Marry me as soon as we can arrange it. I don't want to spend another day without you as my wife." "Yes," Grace whispered. "Yes, absolutely yes." Xander pulled her into his arms, kissing her soundly while Thomas cheered from his chair. "About damn time," the old man said. "Now I can die happy." "Don't talk like that, Pa," Xander said, but his father just waved a hand. "I'm not afraid of dying. I just wanted to see you settled first. Now I can rest easy." They set the wedding date for the first Saturday in October, giving Grace just enough time to prepare. Sarah was ecstatic, immediately volunteering to help with everything. Mrs. Henderson insisted on making the cake, and half the town seemed invested in making sure the ceremony was perfect. Grace wrote to her few remaining relatives back east, not expecting them to make the journey but wanting to share her happiness. She sold most of her preserves at market and used the money to buy fabric for a wedding dress, a beautiful cream-colored silk that Sarah helped her sew. Xander was a constant presence through it all, stopping by whenever he could spare a moment, his eyes full of love and anticipation. They talked about their future, about Grace moving to the ranch, about expanding the cattle operation and maybe breeding horses as well. Xander wanted to build on an addition to the house, giving them private space while still being close enough to care for his father. "I want you to feel like it's our home, not just my parents' old place," he explained. "Your input matters to me." "We'll make it ours together," Grace assured him. 3 days before the wedding, Thomas Sr. took a turn for the worse. He slipped into a deep sleep and didn't wake up, breathing but unreachable. The doctor said it could be hours or days. There was no way to know. Xander was devastated. Grace stayed at the ranch, holding his hand while they kept vigil at his father's bedside. The old man looked peaceful, his weathered face relaxed in sleep. "I wanted him to be there," Xander said roughly. "I wanted him to see us married." "He already knew," Grace said softly. "He was happy for us, that's what matters." Thomas Cole Sr. passed away quietly just before dawn on the morning of the wedding. Xander was holding his hand, Grace's arm around his shoulders, when the old man took one last breath and was gone. They sat in silence for a long time. Then, Xander gently closed his father's eyes and stood. "We should postpone," he said, his voice hollow. "The wedding. It wouldn't be right, not with Pa just gone." Grace stood and took his face in her hands, making him look at her. "Your father's last clear words were telling us not to wait. He wanted this for you, for us. Postponing won't bring him back, and it won't honor his memory. But getting married today, building the life he wanted for you, that honors him." "I don't know if I can," Xander admitted. "I don't know if I can stand up there and make promises when I feel like this. You won't be standing alone. I'll be right there beside you, and every promise we make we'll be making for him too, for the future he wanted to see." Xander pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I don't deserve you." "Yes, you do. We deserve each other." The funeral was held that afternoon, a simple graveside service attended by seemingly the whole town. People spoke of Thomas Sr.'s integrity, his generosity, his role in building the community. Xander stood stone-faced through it all, Grace's hand clasped tightly in his. After the burial, they returned to the church, where the wedding guests were already gathering. The Reverend had suggested they postpone, but Grace had quietly insisted they proceed. Xander needed this, needed something good to hold onto in the midst of his grief. Grace changed into her wedding dress in the church's small back room, Sarah fussing over every detail. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked gently. "No one would blame you for waiting." "I'm sure. Xander needs to know that life goes on, that there's still beauty and hope even in the darkness. This is the right thing to do." When Grace walked down the aisle on Mrs. Henderson's arm, she saw Xander waiting at the altar. He was pale, his eyes shadowed with grief, but when he saw her, his face transformed. Love and gratitude and wonder all mixed together, and she knew she'd made the right choice. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. They exchanged vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other through whatever came. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Xander kissed Grace with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "Thank you," he whispered against her lips, "for being exactly what I needed." The reception was subdued out of respect for Thomas Sr., but there was still joy. People toasted the new couple, and Mrs. Henderson's cake was declared the best anyone had ever tasted. Grace and Xander danced one waltz, holding each other close, finding comfort in the familiar embrace. As evening fell, they rode out to the Triple C together, Mr. and Mrs. Cole now. The house felt empty without Thomas Sr.'s presence, but it was theirs now to fill with new memories and new life. In their bedroom, Xander held Grace like she was something precious and fragile. "I meant every word," he said. "Every promise. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making you happy." "You already have," Grace said. just by being you. They made love slowly, tenderly, sealing the promises they'd made with their bodies as well as their words. Afterward, Grace lay in Xander's arms and felt a peace settle over her that was almost overwhelming. This was home. This man, this place, this life they would build together. Everything she'd run from, all the pain and betrayal and loss had led her here. To this moment. To him. "I'm glad I came to Sweetwater," she whispered into the darkness. Xander's arms tightened around her. "So am I. God, so am I." The first months of marriage were an adjustment. Grace moved her belongings from the cottage to the ranch, transforming the house with small touches that made it feel like theirs. Curtains in the kitchen, flowers in vases, books on the shelves. She learned the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings and late nights, the constant demands of caring for animals and land. Xander was patient with her learning curve, teaching her to ride better, showing her the account books, including her in every decision. He'd meant what he said about partnership, and he proved it daily with his actions. The hands accepted Grace readily, charmed by her willingness to pitch in and her genuine interest in the work. She learned their names and their stories, remembered their birthdays, made sure there were always cookies in the kitchen. Within weeks, they were fiercely loyal to her. Winter came early that year, snow falling in November and not letting up. Grace and Xander spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other, making plans for the spring. They talked about everything, their hopes and fears, silly memories and serious dreams. "I want children," Xander said one night. "I know we haven't talked about it much, but I do. I want to fill this house with noise and laughter." "So do I," Grace said. "I always imagined a big family, 4 or 5 kids at least." 4 or 5, Xander laughed. "You're ambitious," says the man who runs 1,000 head of cattle. Fair point. Grace found out she was pregnant in February. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but when the doctor confirmed it, the reality hit her with surprising force. She was going to be a mother. She and Xander were bringing a child into the world. Xander's reaction when she told him was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "We're having a baby," he kept saying, like he couldn't quite believe it. "Grace, we're going to be parents." "Are you scared?" she asked. "Terrified," he admitted, "but also happier than I knew was possible." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Grace felt well, blooming with health as summer returned. Her body changed, swelling with the life growing inside her, and Xander treated her like she was made of glass. "I'm not going to break," she protested when he insisted on doing all the heavy lifting. "I know, but you're carrying our child and I'm going to take care of you whether you like it or not." "I like it," Grace admitted. "I just don't want to be useless." "You could never be useless." "But let me do this, please. Let me take care of you." So Grace let him fuss, and secretly she loved every minute of it. She'd never been cherished like this before, treated as precious and important. It healed something in her she hadn't even known was broken. Sarah threw her a party in July, all the women in Sweetwater gathering to bring gifts and advice. Grace sat surrounded by friends, opening tiny clothes and blankets, and felt overwhelmed by the community she'd found. "You're one of us now," Mrs. Henderson said, patting her hand. "This baby's going to have a whole town of aunts and uncles." In late August, Grace went into labor. It was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours, and there were moments when she thought she couldn't do it. But Xander was there the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her face, encouraging her through every contraction. "You're the strongest person I know," he told her. "You can do this." And she did. Their son was born just after dawn, a healthy baby with a powerful set of lungs and dark hair like his father's. Xander held him with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. "He's perfect," Xander whispered. "Grace, he's absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas, after Xander's father, with the middle name James after Grace's father. Little Thomas Cole made his presence known immediately, demanding and loud and utterly adored. Grace discovered that motherhood came naturally to her. She loved nursing her son, watching him grow and change, seeing glimpses of both her and Xander in his features. Xander was a devoted father, rising in the night to bring Thomas to her, changing diapers without complaint, spending hours just holding his sleeping son. "I never knew," he said one evening, watching Thomas nurse. "I never knew I could love anyone as much as I love you too." Grace reached for his hand. "We're blessed. We are." Thomas was 6 months old when Grace realized she was pregnant again. She was surprised. They'd been careful, but also delighted. Xander was thrilled, already planning where they'd put a second nursery. Their daughter was born in the fall of 1878, an easier birth than Thomas had been. She came into the world quietly, with her mother's dark eyes and a serious expression that made the doctor laugh. "This one's going to be thoughtful," he predicted. They named her Clara after Grace's aunt, with the middle name Elizabeth after Xander's mother. Clara was everything Thomas wasn't, calm where he was boisterous, content where he was demanding. The two children balanced each other perfectly. Grace's days were full, busier than she'd ever imagined, but she was happy. Watching Xander play with their children, seeing him teach Thomas to ride, hearing him sing lullabies to Clara, filled her heart to overflowing. The ranch prospered under Xander's management. He expanded the herd, improved the breeding stock, bought adjacent land when it became available. By 1880, the Triple C was one of the most successful ranches in Wyoming, and Xander had earned a reputation as a fair but shrewd businessman. Grace continued her garden and her preserves, now selling regularly to restaurants as far away as Cheyenne. She hired help for the house, a young woman named Emma who was wonderful with the children, giving Grace time to focus on her growing business. They were building something together, a legacy that would outlast them both. Thomas was 4 and Clara was 2 when Grace had her third child, another boy they named William after no one in particular, simply because they liked the name. Will was a happy baby, always smiling, and he brought a new energy to the household. "3 children," Xander said, holding Will while Thomas and Clara played at his feet. "We're outnumbered." "You wanted a big family," Grace reminded him. "I'm not complaining, though maybe we could stop at 3, Grace laughed. "We'll see." But 3 proved to be enough. The children grew healthy and strong, filling the ranch house with exactly the noise and laughter Xander had dreamed of. Thomas showed an early aptitude for ranching, following his father everywhere, asking endless questions. Clara loved books and spent hours being read to, already recognizing some letters at 3. Will was still a baby, but he had a stubborn streak that promised interesting things to come. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Xander took Grace to the spot where he'd first kissed her in front of her old cottage. Someone else lived there now, but the new tenants didn't mind them standing on the porch for a few moments. 5 years, Xander said, holding her close. "Best 5 years of my life." "Mine too," Grace said. "I keep thinking about how different things could have been, if I hadn't come to Sweetwater, if I'd stayed in Philadelphia, if I'd never met you. But you did. You came here to start over and you found me, found us. I'm so glad I did." Grace looked up at him, this man who'd given her everything she'd ever wanted and so much she hadn't known to dream of. "I love you, Xander Cole, more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. I love you too, today, tomorrow, always." He kissed her there on that porch, just as he had 5 years before, and Grace felt the same flutter in her chest. Some things never changed, and the way Xander made her feel was one of them. They rode back to the ranch as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors. The house came into view, lights glowing in the windows, and Grace could hear the children's laughter even from a distance. This was home. This was family. This was the life she'd built from the ashes of her old one, better and richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined. She'd come to Sweetwater broken and afraid, looking for nothing more than a place to hide from her failures. Instead, she'd found healing and purpose, and a love that had transformed her completely. She'd found Xander, the man who made her glad she'd taken that leap of faith. And she would spend the rest of her days grateful for the courage it had taken to start over, and for the unexpected grace of finding exactly where she belonged. The years continued to pass in a blur of happiness and hard work. Thomas grew into a serious boy of 7, already riding like he'd been born in the saddle. He had his father's gray eyes and steady temperament, and it was clear he'd take over the ranch someday. Clara at 5 was reading on her own now, devouring every book she could get her hands on. She'd announced she wanted to be a teacher, and Grace had no doubt she'd achieve it. Will at 3 was the wild card, fearless and impulsive, keeping everyone on their toes. The ranch continued to thrive. Xander had added horses to their operation, beautiful animals that commanded top dollar. Grace's preserve business had expanded beyond what she'd ever imagined. Her products sold in stores across Wyoming and into neighboring territories. They'd built a small facility on the ranch property dedicated to production, and Grace employed 3 women from town to help with the work. Who would have thought a Philadelphia lady would become Wyoming's preserve queen? Sarah teased one afternoon. She and Frank had married and had 2 children of their own, and the 2 families spent frequent time together. "I'm not sure about queen," Grace said, laughing. "But I'm proud of what we've built. You should be. You and Xander both. You're proof that good things happen to good people." Grace thought about that later, watching Xander teach Thomas to rope in the corral while Clara read on the porch and Will toddled after the barn cats. Sarah was right. They were blessed, and Grace never took that for granted. She'd seen too much loss, experienced too much pain, to ever forget how precious happiness was. In the spring of 1883, when Thomas was 8, Clara was 6, and Will was 4, Grace discovered she was pregnant for the 4th time. It was unexpected. She'd thought they were done having children, but the surprise quickly turned to joy. "Another one," Xander said, his hand on her still flat belly. "Our family keeps growing. Are you happy about it? Are you kidding? I'm thrilled. I love being a father. I love our children." One more just means one more person to love. The pregnancy was easy, and Grace felt well throughout. Their 4th child, a girl they named Margaret, was born in January of 1884 during a snowstorm. She was tiny and perfect, with wisps of blonde hair that surprised them both. "Where did that come from?" Xander wondered, touching Margaret's pale curls. "My mother's mother was blonde," Grace remembered. "I'd forgotten. Margaret was a sweet-natured baby, and her siblings doted on her." Thomas was old enough to be genuinely helpful. Clara loved playing little mother, and even Will was gentle with his baby sister. The house was full to bursting now. 4 children and 2 adults and Emma, who'd become part of the family. There were always toys scattered on the floor, always laundry to wash, always someone needing something. It was chaos, and it was exhausting, and Grace wouldn't have traded it for anything. On quiet evenings after the children were in bed, Grace and Xander would sit on the porch and marvel at what they'd built. 9 years, Grace said on their anniversary in 1885. 9 years since I showed up at your door with a cherry pie. Best decision you ever made, Xander said. Second best. The best was saying yes when you proposed. I don't know, that pie was really good. Grace laughed and swatted his arm. You're impossible, and you love me anyway. I do. God help me, I really do. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out. Margaret was 18 months old now, toddling around and getting into everything. The older children were healthy and thriving, each developing their own interests and personalities. The ranch was more successful than ever, the preserve business was booming, and Grace and Xander were deeply, contentedly in love. You ever think about what your life would have been like? Xander asked. If you'd stayed in Philadelphia, Grace considered. Sometimes. I probably would have married someone eventually, someone suitable and boring, had a couple of children, lived a perfectly respectable, perfectly miserable life. No preserves business, definitely not. Society ladies don't go into business, it wouldn't have been proper. Thank God you left then. Wyoming's gain is Philadelphia's loss. Thank God I found you, Grace corrected. That's what made all the difference. I could have started over anywhere, but it wouldn't have meant anything without you. Xander pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. We found each other, and we built something beautiful. We did. Inside, one of the children called out, probably while having a nightmare. Xander stood to go check, but Grace put a hand on his arm. I'll go. You stay and enjoy the quiet for a minute. She found Will sitting up in bed, looking frightened. Mama, I had a bad dream. Grace gathered him into her arms. It's all right, sweetheart. Dreams can't hurt you. Promise? I promise. You're safe here always. She stayed until he fell back asleep, then checked on the other children. Thomas was sprawled across his bed, blankets kicked off. Clara slept with a book still clutched in her hand. Margaret was curled in a ball, her thumb in her mouth. Grace adjusted blankets, removed the book, made sure everyone was comfortable. This was her life now, these small acts of care, these constant adjustments and accommodations. And she loved every minute of it. When she returned to the porch, Xander was still sitting there, his face peaceful in the moonlight. Everyone all right? Everyone's perfect, Grace said, settling back beside him. Just like us. The seasons cycled through, each bringing its own rhythms and demands. Calving in spring, roundup in fall, the constant maintenance that ranch life required. The children grew and changed, becoming more themselves with each passing year. Thomas at 10 was already working alongside his father, learning the business from the ground up. Clara at 8 had convinced Grace to start teaching her French from an old textbook, determined to be educated beyond what the small Sweetwater school offered. Will at 6 was still wild but starting to settle, showing an unexpected talent for working with horses. Margaret at 3 followed everyone around, chattering constantly. The baby of the family in every sense, Grace's preserve business had plateaued at a comfortable level, enough to keep her engaged without overwhelming her. She'd trained her employees well, and much of the day-to-day work could run without her direct oversight. This gave her time to focus more on the children's education and on helping Xander with ranch administration. They'd hired a tutor for the children, a young man named David Preston who'd come west for his health. He was patient and knowledgeable, and under his guidance the children flourished academically. Grace sat in on lessons when she could, enjoying learning alongside her children. In the fall of 1888, Sweetwater celebrated its 20th anniversary as an incorporated town. There was a huge festival, with music and dancing and speeches. Xander was asked to speak, as one of the area's most successful ranchers, and Grace sat proudly in the audience as he talked about the importance of community and hard work and building for the future. My wife and I came together here in Sweetwater, he said. She came from back east, looking for a fresh start. I was born here, never lived anywhere else, but we both found what we needed in this town. We found each other, we found purpose, we found home. That's what Sweetwater means to me. It's the place where good people come to build good lives." The crowd applauded enthusiastically, and when Xander returned to his seat, Grace squeezed his hand. "That was beautiful," she whispered. "It was true," he replied. That night, at the dance that closed the festival, Grace and Xander waltzed under strings of lanterns just as they had 13 years before at that first dance. Grace was 35 now, Xander 39, and they moved together with the ease of long practice. "Remember the first time we danced?" Grace asked. "Of course. I was terrified I'd step on your feet. You were perfect, you are perfect, far from it, but I'm perfect for you, and that's what matters." The music swelled around them, and Grace closed her eyes, letting herself be transported back to that first dance, that first spark of connection. So much had changed since then. She'd changed, transformed from a wounded girl running from her past into a confident woman building her future. And Xander had been there through all of it, steady and supportive and endlessly loving. When the dance ended, their children rushed up, demanding turns. Xander danced with Clara and Margaret while Thomas gallantly offered his arm to his mother. Will danced with Sarah's daughter, serious and concentrated on not messing up the steps. Grace looked around at her family, her friends, her community, and felt her heart overflow with gratitude. This life she'd built, this beautiful, messy, perfect life, had exceeded every hope she'd dared to dream. The turn of the decade brought changes. Thomas at 13 was more man than boy, talking seriously about his future running the ranch. Clara at 11 announced she wanted to go to university back east, to get the kind of education Wyoming couldn't offer. Will at 9 had found his calling working with horses, and Xander had started teaching him about breeding and training. Margaret at 6 was everyone's favorite, sweet and loving and completely spoiled by her older siblings. Grace and Xander talked late into the night about Clara's ambitions. "She's so young," Grace said. "The thought of her going all the way to Boston. She's got years yet before we need to decide, but if that's what she wants, we'll make it happen." "Your daughter wanting to leave the ranch, that must be hard for you." Xander shook his head. "My daughter wanting to be educated and make her own choices, that makes me proud. We raised her to think for herself, Grace. We can't complain when she does." "I'm not complaining, I'm just going to miss her, me too. But we'll always be here when she needs us. That's what family means." In 1891, when Grace was 38 and Xander 42, they received a letter that shook Grace to her core. It was from a lawyer in Philadelphia, informing her that Thomas, her former fiancé, had died and left her a letter to be delivered after his death. Grace stared at the envelope, her hands shaking. She hadn't thought about Thomas in years, had relegated him to a corner of her past that she never visited. "You want me to open it?" Xander asked gently. "No, I should do it." She broke the seal and read the single page inside. Thomas's handwriting, shaky with age or illness, filled the paper. "Dear Grace," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and perhaps that's for the best. I wanted to apologize for how I treated you all those years ago. You deserved so much better than my lies and cowardice. I was a fool, and I've regretted my actions every day since. I heard through mutual acquaintances that you went west and married. I hope you found happiness. You always deserved it more than I could give you. Please forgive me if you can. Yours in regret, Thomas." Grace read it twice, then handed it to Xander without a word. He read it quickly, then looked at her with concern. "How do you feel?" "Sad," Grace said slowly. "Sad that he carried that regret for so long, but also nothing. He's just a person I used to know, someone from a different life. He doesn't matter anymore." "Are you sure?" "Completely. You're my life, Xander. You and our children and this ranch and this town. Thomas is just a ghost from the past, and not even a frightening one, just sad. She took the letter and walked to the fireplace, dropping it into the flames. They both watched as it curled and blackened and turned to ash. "Goodbye, Thomas," Grace said quietly. "I forgive you, and I'm letting you go." Xander wrapped his arms around her from behind, and Grace leaned back into his warmth. "I love you," he said. "I love you too. Thank you for being everything he wasn't. Thank you for giving me the chance to be." Life continued its steady rhythm. The children grew older, each following their own path. Thomas took on more and more responsibility at the ranch, proving himself capable and wise beyond his years. Clara continued her studies with fierce determination, and when she was 16, she took the entrance exams for Vassar College in New York and passed with flying colors. Xander and Grace were simultaneously proud and heartbroken when she left for school in the fall of 1893. Will, at 14, had become the ranch's horse expert, with a gift for gentling even the wildest animals. Ranchers from 3 states sought out Triple C horses, and Will's reputation grew. Margaret, at 10, was the family's heart, keeping everyone connected with her sweet nature and easy affection. Grace, at 40, was still beautiful, her dark hair touched with gray at the temples, her face lined but happy. Xander, at 43, was distinguished, his temples fully gray, his body still strong from ranch work. They'd weathered the years together, growing not apart but deeper into each other. On their 18th anniversary, Xander surprised Grace with a trip. He'd arranged for the ranch to run without them for a week, and he took her to Denver, the farthest she'd been from home in nearly 2 decades. They stayed in a real hotel, ate in fancy restaurants, attended the theater. For a week, they were just a couple, not parents or business owners or pillars of the community. Just Xander and Grace, remembering who they'd been when they fell in love. "This is wonderful," Grace said one evening as they walked through the city streets. "But I miss home." "So do I," Xander admitted. "I miss the kids, miss the ranch. Is it terrible that I can't wait to get back? Not terrible. It means we built something worth missing." They returned to Sweetwater refreshed and even more appreciative of their life. Margaret launched herself at them when they arrived, and even Thomas, almost a man at 16, hugged them tightly. "It's good to be home," Grace said, looking around at her family. "It is," Xander agreed. The years marched on. Clara graduated from Vassar in 1897 with honors, and immediately found a position teaching at a girls' school in Boston. She came home for summers and holidays, full of stories and new ideas, and Grace loved seeing the woman her daughter had become. Thomas, at 20, met a girl named Helen from a neighboring ranch. She was practical and kind, perfect for him, and Xander and Grace welcomed her into the family with open arms. They married in 1899, and Helen moved to the Triple C, easily finding her place in the household. Will, at 19, was courting seriously, a girl named Rebecca who shared his love of horses. Margaret, at 16, was finishing school and planning to study medicine, shocking everyone with her ambition. "Medicine?" Grace asked. "Darling, that's such a hard path for a woman." "I know, Mama. But I want to help people. Dr. Harrison says I have the aptitude for it, and there are medical colleges accepting women now. I can do this." "Then you will," Xander said firmly. "We'll support you, whatever you decide." As the century turned, Grace looked back on the life she'd built with wonder. She was 47 years old, married for 24 years to the love of her life. She had 4 grown children, all healthy and pursuing their dreams. She had a business she'd built from nothing, a home she loved, a community that embraced her. Most of all, she had Xander. Her partner, her love, her best friend. The man who'd seen her at her most broken and loved her anyway. Who'd built a life with her that exceeded anything she could have imagined. On New Year's Day, 1900, the whole family gathered at the ranch. Clara was home from Boston. Thomas and Helen were there with their new baby, Xander's first grandchild. Will and Rebecca were engaged, planning a summer wedding. Margaret was preparing for medical school in Chicago. They sat around the big dining table, multiple generations now, and Xander raised his glass. "To family," he said. "To the past that brought us here and the future we're building together. And especially to Grace, who came to Wyoming looking for a fresh start and gave me everything I ever needed." "To Grace," everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Grace felt tears slip down her cheeks, happy tears. She looked around the table at these people she loved, this family she and Xander had created together. "I have something to say too," she said, her voice thick with emotion. 25 years ago, I came to Sweetwater. I was running away from pain and failure, looking for somewhere to hide. I never expected to find love, to build a family, to create a life that mattered. But I found Xander, and he made me glad I came. Every day since then has been a gift. Every one of you is a gift. I'm the luckiest woman alive, and I thank God for bringing me to Wyoming, to Sweetwater, to this ranch, to all of you." She looked at Xander, and he was crying too, unashamed. "I love you," he mouthed. "I love you too," she mouthed back. The children started talking again, the moment passing, but Grace held it close to her heart. This was everything. This love, this family, this life. She'd come to start over, and she'd found so much more than she ever dreamed possible. Years later, when Grace was in her 60s and Xander approaching 70, they'd sit on that same porch and watch their grandchildren play in the yard. Thomas and Helen had 3 children now. Will and Rebecca had 2. Even Clara had married, a professor she'd met in Boston, and they visited every summer with their daughter. Margaret had become a doctor, one of the few women physicians in the West, and worked at a hospital in Denver. She came home whenever she could, and the whole town was proud of her. The ranch was thriving under Thomas's management. The preserve business had been sold to a company in Cheyenne for a tidy sum, and Grace and Xander spent their days in peaceful retirement. "We did all right," Xander said one summer evening, watching little Thomas the third chase chickens. "Better than all right," Grace said. "We did wonderfully." She was 65 now, her hair completely white, her body slowed by age but still strong. Xander was 68, still tall and handsome despite the years. They held hands the way they'd been doing for 40 years, comfortable and connected. "Any regrets?" Xander asked. Grace thought about it seriously. "Not one. Every hard thing, every loss, every struggle, it all led me here. To you, to this life. I'd do it all exactly the same. Even the part with that fool in Philadelphia, even that. Because it made me appreciate you more, made me understand what real love looks like." Xander lifted her hand to his lips, kissing it with the same tenderness he'd shown that first time, so many years ago. "You're still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen," he said. "You need spectacles," Grace laughed. "I have spectacles. I'm wearing them, and I stand by what I said." They sat until the sun set, painting the Wyoming sky in brilliant colors. Inside the house, multiple generations of family were preparing dinner, voices and laughter floating through the open windows. Grace leaned her head on Xander's shoulder, feeling his arm come around her. This moment, this peace, this contentment was everything she'd ever wanted. She'd come to Sweetwater broken and alone, carrying nothing but 2 carpetbags and a heart full of hurt. She'd been looking for escape, for a place to hide from her failures. Instead, she'd found home. She'd found purpose. She'd found love deeper and richer than she'd known existed. She'd found Xander, the man who made her glad she'd taken that leap of faith all those years ago, and she would be grateful for it every day for the rest of her life. As the stars began to appear overhead, Grace whispered a prayer of thanks for every mile she'd traveled, every choice she'd made, every moment that had led her here. To this man, this family, this beautiful life they'd built together. She'd come to start over, and she'd found everything she'd ever needed. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she would love Xander Cole and this life they'd created until her very last breath, and beyond.